I used to believe in love stories, the kind where two people overcome obstacles and come out stronger, hand in hand no matter what. That's what I thought I had with Jacob. I was wrong. Our love story didn't end in a fairy tale, happily ever after. It ended in betrayal, shattered trust, and a cold, crushing realization that the man I had vowed to spend my life with had never truly respected me. It started with the honeymoon. The moment that should have been the beginning of our new life together, a sacred time for just the two of us, was tainted by a betrayal so brazen I could hardly believe it. I found out accidentally, of course, because Jacob didn't even have the decency to tell me himself that he had invited his sister, Angie, to join us. Not as an afterthought. Not as a last-minute decision. No, he had planned this for weeks, keeping it from me because, in his words, he knew I'd make a big deal out of it. A big deal? As if my feelings, my boundaries meant nothing. I confronted him, expecting an apology, some sign of remorse. Instead, I got gaslighting. He made me feel like I was crazy for being upset. He spun the story to make it seem like I was the unreasonable one, like I was overreacting to something so small. Small? Our honeymoon being turned into a family vacation without my consent was small? That moment, I knew something was deeply wrong. But I wanted to believe in us. I wanted to believe he would realize his mistake, make it right. So I tried. I swallowed my rage. I reasoned with myself. Maybe this was just a misstep, an error in judgment. Then came the lies. They started small little manipulations, convenient omissions. But they grew, twisting into something uglier. I started hearing whispers, catching glimpses of what he had been saying behind my back. He painted me as controlling, difficult, too sensitive. He told his family I was the one who canceled the honeymoon out of pure spite, conveniently leaving out the part where he had disrespected me first. He made me out to be the villain while he played the part of the misunderstood husband, the poor man dealing with an unreasonable wife. And they believed him. Of course they did. He was always good at charming people, at spinning the narrative just enough to make himself look like the victim. The worst part? I started to doubt myself. I started wondering if maybe, just maybe, I was being unreasonable. That's the thing about emotional manipulation. It seeps into your mind like poison, making you question everything, even your own reality. I found myself apologizing for being hurt, for reacting, for expecting basic respect. Counseling was the final straw. We sat there across from a stranger who was supposed to help us mend what was breaking. But all I saw was the man sitting beside me, so indifferent, so detached. It was like looking at a stranger. And in that moment, I realized he'd always been one. If my first marriage taught me anything, it was that love alone wasn't enough. Love couldn't survive lies, manipulation, and betrayal. Love meant nothing if the person beside you saw your pain as an inconvenience rather than something to protect. I walked away from Jacob with scars, some visible, some buried deep, but I walked away stronger. And then I found Caleb. Caleb wasn't just my high school sweetheart, he was my safe place, the person who had seen me at my worst and never turned away. We had drifted apart after graduation, life pulling us in different directions. But fate had a strange way of bringing people back together. After everything with Jacob, Caleb felt like warmth in the middle of a storm. He didn't try to control me. He didn't gaslight me into doubting my own feelings. He simply loved me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. But love, no matter how pure, couldn't erase the ghosts of my past. I had spent my entire life chasing something from my father that he was never willing to give acceptance, acknowledgement, the smallest scrap of love that wasn't conditional. I was never enough for him. I was always the problem, the burden, the one who overreacted. He had watched as my stepmother, Jan, bullied me for years, turning our home into a battlefield where I was the only one unarmed. And he had done nothing. No, worse, he had justified it, gaslit me into believing that I was the issue, that I needed to be more understanding. Even after everything, after I had been discarded time and time again, I still wanted him there for my wedding. Somewhere deep in the remnants of my childhood hope, I wanted him to look at me the way fathers were supposed to look at their daughters. Proud, unwavering, loving. But my father made his choice. When I told him I was marrying Caleb, his first question wasn't about my happiness. It wasn't even about me. It was about Jan. Will she be invited? The woman who had spent years cutting me down, chipping away at my self-worth, the woman who had treated me as if I were less than nothing, he wanted her there. I told him no. And just like that, the facade crumbled. The man who had always been neutral, who had always acted as though he were a victim caught between two sides, finally showed his true colors. He didn't fight for me. He didn't even hesitate. He made it clear, if Jan wasn't welcome, then neither was he. I wish I could say it didn't hurt, that I had expected it, that I had seen it coming. But a part of me, that same foolish part that had once believed Jacob would change, had still hoped. I had given my father chance after chance to prove that I mattered. And every single time, he had chosen someone else over me. So I let him go. The day of my wedding, as I walked down the aisle, my father's absence loomed like a shadow, but I didn't let it consume me. I had Caleb. I had my mother who had stood by me despite everything. I had love, the kind that didn't come with conditions, the kind that didn't make me feel like I had to earn it. And for the first time in my life, I realized I didn't need my father's approval. Because I was finally free. If I had learned anything by now, it was that some wounds never truly heal. They scab over, get buried beneath new memories, but they still sting when touched. My past had already stolen so much from me, my childhood, my sense of security, my faith in family. But I had rebuilt myself. I had walked away from a failed marriage, reclaimed my worth, and found love in Caleb. I had drawn the final line with my father, choosing peace over the endless battle for his approval. I thought I had finally escaped the chaos of my past. But the past doesn't let go so easily. My mother was never the nurturing type. She was a woman who saw love as currency, something given only when it benefited her. When she remarried, I was pushed aside, a forgotten relic of a life she no longer cared for. My stepsister Jess was her new favorite, her perfect little prodigy. I was nothing more than an inconvenience, a problem to be dealt with. And when Jess wasn't enough, my mother focused on my stepbrother Jake, making sure that he had everything I was denied. At 18, I was thrown out like trash. My mother made it clear her new family mattered, and I didn't. I struggled. I fought to survive. But I did survive. And I swore I would never let them take anything from me again. Years later, after I had found my own success, Jess came crawling back, dripping in faux remorse. She begged for forgiveness, claimed she had changed. For a moment, I almost believed her. But then I found out the truth: her husband was involved in shady business dealings, and she thought she could use my connection to Caleb's family business to her advantage. When that failed, when I refused to let her manipulate me again, she retaliated the only way she knew how: by lying. She spread vicious rumors that I sabotaged her husband's career out of spite, twisting the truth until I was the villain in a story she had written herself. And my mother, as always, stood by her side, championing her lies, painting me as a bitter, vengeful woman who just couldn't let go of the past. But this time, I fought back. I wasn't that helpless girl anymore. I wasn't going to stand by while they tore me down. So I took them to court. The legal battle was brutal. Jess played the victim perfectly, crocodile tears and all. My mother, ever the enabler, swore up and down that I had always been the problem, that I was out for revenge. But the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface, no matter how many lies are piled on top of it. In the end, the evidence was undeniable. I won. Jess and her husband lost everything: their reputation, their finances, their credibility. My mother, humiliated and furious, tried to reach out, but I didn't care. They had tried to destroy me, but all they did was prove, once and for all, that I was never the villain in their twisted little story. I walked away from that courtroom with my head held high, knowing that justice had finally been served. They had underestimated me. They would never make that mistake again. They say weddings are supposed to be the happiest day of your life. A fresh start. A moment where love triumphs over everything else. But for me, my wedding wasn't just about love, it was about justice. For years, I had been cast aside, overlooked, treated as if I were nothing in my own family. My mother had made her choice when she discarded me in favor of her perfect little golden child, Jess. My father had made his when he chose his wife, Jan, over me. And my stepsister? She had spent her entire life ensuring that I would always remain in her shadow, using lies, manipulation, and outright cruelty to push me down. But this time, I wouldn't be the one walking away in shame. Caleb had been my rock through everything, and as we planned our wedding, he knew the truth. I needed this day to be more than just vows and celebration. I needed it to be a reckoning. From the moment the wedding planning began, I could feel the storm brewing. My mother, despite having kicked me out years ago, suddenly insisted she be involved. Jess, ever the golden child, acted as if she was entitled to a starring role. They made snide comments about the venue, belittled my dress choices, and made it clear in every way possible that they didn't believe I deserved this happiness. But I stayed silent. I let them believe they were winning. Then came the final insult. They had a plan one they thought was brilliant, a way to humiliate me on my own wedding day. My mother, ever the puppet master, had orchestrated it all. Jess would steal the spotlight. She would show up in a gown nearly identical to mine, walk down the aisle before me as if she were the true bride, and bask in the attention that was meant for me. The guests, many of whom still knew her as the better daughter, the innocent one, would be dazzled. My moment, the one I had waited for my entire life, would be overshadowed by her. They thought they had me trapped. They had no idea I was 10 steps ahead. The morning of the wedding, everything appeared to go according to their plan. Jess arrived in a white floor-length dress, smirking as she made her way inside. My mother fussed over her like a doting queen, whispering, "This is going to be our moment." They were giddy with anticipation, believing they had pulled off the ultimate humiliation. And then the music started. Jess stepped forward, ready to take my place only to be met with utter confusion. The officiant, the wedding planner, even the guests all hesitated. Because standing at the end of the aisle wasn't Jeff. It wasn't even our wedding party. It was security. My wedding planner, a dear friend who knew everything, approached her with a polite but firm smile. "Excuse me, miss, but I'm afraid you're not welcome here." Jess's face drained of color. My mother surged forward, demanding an explanation, only for the doors behind them to slam shut. "Locked?" I had warned them not to come. I had made it clear they weren't wanted. But they, in their arrogance, thought they could force their way into my day. They thought they could rob me of my moment. Instead, they were publicly escorted out, humiliated in front of everyone they had hoped to impress. And me? I walked down that aisle alone, in my dress with my guests watching me. For the first time in my life, I was the star of my own story. And it was glorious. I had thought I had seen the worst of betrayal. My mother choosing my stepsister over me, my father refusing to stand by me, just trying to humiliate me on my wedding day. Each of those wounds had left scars. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. A crime so twisted, so unimaginable, that it sent shockwaves through our entire family. Kayla had been a thorn in my side since the day I married into the family. My husband's brother, Jamie, had always been kind and level-headed, but his wife, Kayla, was another story. She was manipulative, cruel in subtle ways, always whispering poison into people's ears to turn them against me. From the moment I entered their family, she made it her mission to undermine me. At first, I dismissed her antics as petty jealousy. She criticized my wedding plans, belittled my successes, and even tried to sabotage my relationship with my husband. But I had no idea how deep her resentment ran. The first real warning came during a family dinner, meant to be a celebration. It was my father-in-law's birthday, and despite the tension, we all tried to put aside our differences for the evening. Kayla, for once, seemed almost pleasant. She smiled. She laughed. She even brought a dish prawns in a rich, aromatic sauce. I should have known something was off. The moment Jamie took a bite, the color drained from his face. He gasped, clutching his throat, his body convulsing as he collapsed against the table. Chaos erupted. Someone screamed. Chairs toppled over. My husband rushed to his brother's side, shaking him, yelling his name. But Jamie's eyes were already rolling back. An ambulance was called. The paramedics worked frantically. And as Jamie was rushed away, one detail became chillingly clear. This wasn't an accident. The prawns had been poisoned. The truth unraveled slowly, agonizingly, like a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. Security footage from the restaurant showed Kayla slipping something into the dish before serving it something she'd intended for me. She had meant to kill me. Her confession, when it finally came, sent a shiver down my spine. Years of resentment, of bitterness, of festering hatred had driven her to this. She blamed me for everything, for her fractured relationships, for her own unhappiness, for every failure in her life. And in her warped mind, I was the obstacle that needed to be removed. Jamie survived, but only barely. The doctors said if he had ingested just a little more, he wouldn't have made it. Kayla was arrested, charged with attempted murder and food tampering. The trial was swift, her guilt undeniable. As she stood before the judge, her eyes met mine one last time. No remorse. No regret. Just a cold, hollow emptiness that sent a shiver down my spine. She was sentenced to prison, and just like that, she was gone from our lives. But the scar she left behind remained. For months, I struggled with the weight of what had happened. The realization that someone so close to me had wanted me dead. The fear that, had things gone differently, I might not have lived to see another day. Yet, through it all, my husband, my family, and my true friends stood by me. And as the dust settled, I made a vow. I would never let fear control me. Never let hatred define me. Kayla had tried to steal my future, but she had failed. I was still standing. And I always would be. After everything I had endured, I thought I was finally free. My life with Caleb was the dream I had longed for. We had worked so hard to buy our first home, a place where we could escape the toxicity of our families and begin building a life of our own. But fate had other plans. It started innocently enough with a visit from Jacob's mother and sister, Sarah. At first, it seemed like a harmless drop-by, but as they settled in, the tension became palpable. There was a sense of entitlement in their presence, something I couldn't quite shake off. As we sat in the living room, Jacob's mother casually mentioned how they needed somewhere to live, how Sarah and her unemployed husband were struggling. Then, without warning, she made an outrageous demand. They wanted our home. I was stunned. My mind raced as I tried to process what I had just heard. Jacob had never mentioned this before, and I certainly hadn't agreed to it. My eyes darted to his, searching for an explanation. But he looked just as shocked as I was. The audacity. His mother claimed that Jacob had already agreed to let them move in, a lie so bold it made my blood boil. No, I said, my voice steady but firm. This is our home. We've worked for this. But the more I refused, the more hostile they became. The insults began flying, accusations of being selfish, of caring only about money. It was as if they believed we owed them everything. Sarah, with her cold, calculating eyes, joined in with a smirk, calling me a gold digger, trying to tear down everything we had fought for. As they stormed out, I could see the fury in their eyes. I knew this wasn't over. They would come back. They always did. And so I took action. Jacob and I installed security cameras just in case. It wasn't long before we got a notification. The footage showed Jacob's mother and Sarah once again outside our house. They were trying to break in, demanding to be let in like they owned the place. It was infuriating, and I felt a knot of dread in my stomach. This was more than a fight. It was a battle to protect everything we had built. Jacob was furious. He arrived home to find them standing at the door, acting as though they had every right to be there. I will never forget the look on his face when he told them, "Leave? No. This is our life. You're not welcome here." The confrontation was explosive, but there was no turning back. Jacob's father, Phil, had already made his feelings clear. He had cut ties with his wife and daughter because of their toxic behavior. He stood by our decision, and we finally had the strength to cut the ties with them once and for all. In the end, we had our home. We had our peace. But the price had been high. Too many years spent dealing with manipulative, entitled people who thought they could take what was ours. It was a fight I would never forget, but it had only strengthened my resolve. This was our life now, and we would protect it with everything we had. After years of battling toxic relatives and clawing my way back from betrayal, I thought I had finally secured a future for myself. My life with Caleb, our home defended against intruders, and the triumphs over those who once sought to crush me had all filled me with cautious hope. But just when I believed the worst was behind me, fate threw another curveball, a twisted plot to seize an inheritance that was rightfully mine. It began on an otherwise ordinary day when I received a letter from an old family lawyer. My distant Aunt Eleanor, a kind soul who had quietly supported me from afar, had passed away, leaving behind not only cherished memories, but also a substantial inheritance. For the first time in years, I felt that perhaps the universe was finally aligning in my favor. I envisioned using the money to secure our future, further fixing up our home, investing in my dreams, and finally putting an end to the financial insecurities that had haunted me for so long. However, the moment the news broke, dark clouds gathered over my newfound hope. Almost immediately, rumors began to swirl within the family. My estranged mother, along with the cadre of conniving relatives who had long harbored resentment and envy, started whispering about my competence, about my supposed unworthiness to receive such a fortune. They claimed that I had squandered opportunities in the past and insinuated that my relationship with Caleb was merely a desperate attempt to cling to stability. Their venomous words were designed to cast doubt on my character and justify their plan to wrest control of the inheritance away from me. I soon learned that they were not content with mere gossip. They had begun to devise a planned conspiracy to forge documents, manipulate legal loopholes, and rewrite Aunt Eleanor's final wishes. My own mother, whose betrayal had already scarred me deeply, emerged as the ringleader. In hushed conversations and behind closed doors, she conspired with other distant relatives to claim that Aunt Eleanor had intended the fortune to go to someone else, someone more stable and deserving than me. Their audacity was shocking, and the betrayal stung all the more given our already tumultuous history. I felt the walls closing in, the old familiar sense of isolation and vulnerability creeping back into my heart. I couldn't let them take away the one beacon of hope that Aunt Eleanor had left me. Determined to fight back, I immediately sought the help of a trustworthy attorney, someone who had once helped me navigate the stormy aftermath of my previous battles. With meticulous care, I gathered every shred of evidence that could substantiate my claim: the original will, correspondence between Aunt Eleanor and her lawyer, even a few heartfelt letters that revealed her deep affection for me and her desire to see me flourish. The ensuing legal battle was nothing short of a war. Courtroom dramas unfolded with explosive testimony, with my relatives trying every trick in the book to undermine my credibility. My mother, ever the manipulator, attempted to paint me as an ingrate unworthy of family legacy. But with each lie they wove, I countered with the undeniable truth found in art, Eleanor's meticulously drafted documents, and the unassailable testimony of her lawyer. Every day in court felt like a battle for my very soul, a fight against the ghosts of my past that had long tormented me. In the end, justice prevailed. The judge saw through the web of deceit, ruling in my favor and affirming that Aunt Eleanor's true intentions were crystal clear. I emerged from that courtroom battle not only as the rightful heir to her fortune, but as a woman who had once again reclaimed her power. Though the scars of betrayal remain, they now serve as a reminder of my strength and resilience. This hard-won victory was more than just financial security. It was a declaration that I would no longer be a pawn in the twisted games of those who once sought to control my life. I had fought back, and I would continue to stand tall no matter what obstacles lay ahead.